So, real briefly, before we start taking questions, you want to tell everybody a little bit about your biography?
Sure. I'm never really sure how to answer that question. Well, thanks for having me on and doing this. I think it's going to be a fun time. So, my biography, let's see. I've been in Portland since 1999 and end of 98, I think. I was with actually at the old school down on MLK. We trained there. It was a long, long time ago.
When was
And say again,
what year was that? Do you remember?
I think I bought a lifetime membership in like 98 or 99 or something
Oh,
like
wow.
that.
Okay.
Um, and then actually I ran into you in the 24-hour fitness years later. All right, so the biography. So let's do that. So done martial arts my whole life. Most of it's been bullshit. Did just about everything you could think of. I spent most of my time on stick and knife fighting with a guy who's still active, Dan Medina. He gave me my black belt at Filipino Eskrima, and that was a fascinating experience. I used to do that every day, and I had to come home with stick kickies with some of my friends. And I trained with the Dog Brothers a few times. That was really interesting in Santa Fe. That was really before the whole ground game started getting going on. Um, so anyway, so I was heavily in. So I teach philosophy, full time faculty member at Portland State, and uh, boy, I don't even know where to be. I was heavily involved in the new atheist movement. I wrote a book, a manual for creating atheists. I'm really interested in how people formulate their beliefs and why they believe what they believe. And then once I figured that out, with the help of others, of course, then I started actively fighting superstition, um, bad beliefs. Similar to what you do in the martial arts. I've taken that and I've applied that hammer to different realms. And so I did that with religion. Recently, I did that with grievance studies, things in the academy, whole disciplines in the academy that are bullshit, basically, and untethered to reality. They're agenda driven, and they don't. Truth is not even secondary; it's just not a consideration at all. They've managed to convince themselves that total nonsense is true. And I just got my purple belt from you. I'm skimming over a lot of stuff. So, any questions about jujitsu, science fiction, critical thinking, lot I guess other things I teach, science and pseudoscience, philosophy of education, reason, rationality, philosophy more generally. We can open it to that.
Yeah, and I think the one of the things that's always helped spark a friendship between you and I, and one of the reasons why I think you're a good fit for the gym is because you've always put a premium on truth, and I've always put a premium on truth. I just applied it pretty much solely to the martial arts, and you've taken it broader perspective, but we kind of share that appreciation for things that are true. Um, I don't want you to be too humble about that academic hoax. That's probably the biggest thing that's ever been pulled off in terms of academia, as far as that kind of thing. Wouldn't you say? I mean, it was pretty huge.
Well, I think if the Wall Street Journal didn't bust us, uh, instead of getting seven bogus papers published, I'm positive we would have gotten a lot more,
Yeah,
13, maybe even 14. I don't know.
right. So you had. I had known you'd been doing this. It was kind of a top secret thing you'd been doing for a
Right,
couple of years, and you guys were submitting academic papers
right.
to top tier journals, and they were getting accepted, and they were completely ridiculous. I mean, one of them was
Asinine. Yeah.
yeah, one of them was how dog parks promote rape culture, and which actually won an award. Another one was you'd taken parts of Mein Kampf and just translated it to English and exchanged the word white man for Jew. That was a pretty big deal, and you would have kept going, except that the only reason why you guys stopped and basically came forward and did the big reveal and revealed that it was actually you guys writing all these papers was the fact that you did have a Wall Street Journal reporter that got onto the trail of this whole thing, right?
Yeah, we got caught. It was probably the most stressful time literally in my entire life. We
Yeah.
got caught prematurely, really prematurely. We had the whole plan like this is the problem. We need to trust academic disciplines. There's an erosion of confidence in our public institutions. these people are cranking out things that everybody knows is bullshit. Everybody, unless you're in the realm of nonsense. And we had hope. So we were gonna the main piece that we missed that we really wanted to do is, and we still, even to this day, we have trouble convincing people of this. People will think, well, it's just a few nut jobs in the academia. No one actually believes this stuff. We wanted to take that thought and translate it into the fact that, look, this is real life. It's in the tech sector, like James Damore. It's in entertainment, media, film. It's literally permeated the whole society. But we
Public,
got busted before we could do that.
yeah, no, it's everywhere. It's in the public school system.
It's in the public schools. I think I told you this, and then I want to go back to something else you said. I think I told you this before. My daughter asked her teacher. I asked my daughter to ask her teacher why they don't talk about hand washing and social distances when they were still in school, and her teacher said, "Well, we don't want to upset kids. It might be traumatic for them."
Yeah.
Like, okay, so now where are we? Are they, would they have been better off if you had talked to them about that or not? Like, clearly. So there is a kind of fragility. We have attempted to protect people, students in particular, from the truth.
Mhm.
And now Lindsay was telling me that long story short, a friend of his daughter had some crazy creepy stalker boyfriend who pounded on her window. She had to call the police. She told her psychologist about it. Her psychologist diagnosed her with PTSD. And so the crazy part about this is we're just dispensing these diagnoses. It's in the colleges of education, it's in psychotherapy, it's in psychology programs, it's in everybody's fragile, everybody's a victim. You got to shelter people from things you can't. So now, for example, well, all right, let me pause there and then go ahead.
No, I'm fascinated by what you're saying. We got one question from Glenn asking about COVID, but you and I, just so everybody knows, pretty much you're open to talk about anything, but we kind of decided that's going to be the one topic we're not going to talk about because there's so much of that already out
Right.
there.
And neither one of us are experts in it. So
Right.
there's no
Neither one of us have anything to do with virology and
so you this is our first lesson. You
yeah,
have to figure out whose voices don't matter.
yeah,
And when it comes to COVID, neither one of our voices matter.
that's true. And also this is a chance for people to get a break from.
Exactly.
I mean, if you
Exactly.
turn on the TV now, it's just nonstop, 24/7. And
How come I can't see those messages?
well, you're not on. Are you on Facebook?
Oh, I'm not on Facebook.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
so
I have a pathological hatred of Facebook. Okay.
I will. I can see it though as we're talking. So I'll tell you any questions that come up. So far,
Okay.
the first one.
So, the other thing is you mentioned friendship and truth, and Aristotle talks about the highest form of friendship between two virtuous people. And I do think that's the type of friendship we've cultivated. Like I count on you if I've ever been out of line, you'll tell me I'm out of line, or you tell me I fucked up, and it won't be, oh, a fuck you thing. It would be, I will take that as you're saying that out of care for me, as opposed to any other possible motivation. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that there is something. I mean, I've benefited tremendously from our friendship.
So have I, and I think that those kind of relationships are super valuable, and they take a long time to cultivate. And yeah,
Yeah, and I wonder. It's interesting because I often wonder what makes some people friends. Like, I think Aristotle said, relatives. I can't remember this exactly. It was in the Ethics, but like if you have relative, like your cousins, that's a form of friendship, and then common interests is a form of friendship. Like that's three, and then two is like conversation. You both like good conversation, and then one is friendship. Between the highest form of friendship is between two virtuous people. And I wonder what people do, how they really live their lives without having friends in either the tier one or tier two stage.
yeah, me too. That's not something that I'd want to find out, but I could, I know there's a lot of lonely people out there, and that's kind of tragic when people don't have any real friendships.
Mm. Switching topics for a moment.
Well,
So I recommended to you. Oh, and we can also talk about Dungeons and Dragons if anybody has any questions about that.
always talk about Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I'm into my guy. Do you think I should make my backstory public?
No, let's not make your backstory public. So we just got a question from Raymond, Coach Ray in Reno. Peter, what are the top three lessons you've learned from teaching that have added value to your life? That's a good question.
That's a really good question. Um, I think one lesson is that when you have to try to explain really, really complicated things in the most simple of ways, it helps you to understand, not just understand, it helps you to grok, that word from Heinlein, to deeply understand something. That's one. Second thing is that I've said before, people don't really have good reasons for what they believe. And is almost a reverse, like in the stronger somebody, the more confidence someone in which someone holds a belief, there's a weird relationship. It's almost disproportional to the evidence they have for that.
Mhm,
And so that's one thing I've learned. Um, and the other thing I think I've learned from teaching is that um, most people, I don't know why thinking about Aristotle a lot, but most people really do have a desire to know the truth. That they really do want to know. uh, they have a kind of an intrinsic philosophy, a love of wisdom, and they want to know.
mhm,
And I think when you really explore and push down with that, especially when you're asking, I teach large classes, but I do my best, and I'm not saying I always succeed at trying to make those classes feel small. And to
mhm.
do that, I take a lot of questions, and in those questions, I've learned that people really do want to know what's true.
Yeah, which is a super optimistic, I think, way to view things, and I think you're probably right. But I mean, that's a good thing. Here's another question from Kinson Yip, somewhat related to COVID, but really it's a broader question about your latest book, How to Have Difficult Conversations. So he says, "Hi Peter, what
Impossible
strategies?"
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, what is it?
How to have impossible
Impossible.
conversations.
That's right. Yeah. What strategies or principles from your book would you have suggest to convince my family members on my wife's side to take social distancing seriously? I want them to understand it's important for them to temporarily stop visiting one another for the next few weeks. So you could apply that to anything. But what are the top three things you would say to have an impossible conversation with a relationship that I know you and I have talked about this before. It's not a relationship of choice. So it's you have to
Yes,
very carefully sometimes.
we have, and I'm not sure we see eye to eye on that, but that's those disagreements are good. So the I'd like to reframe the question. Instead of thinking about it in terms of you convincing someone, think about it in terms of what would you have to say to someone for them to convince themselves. And the thing that you would have to say to someone for them to convince themselves is nothing, because you that would be delivering a message. So if that's nothing, then the question becomes, well, how would you do it? What method would you use? And the method you'd use to can help someone convince someone of uh, something that they ought to be doing is to ask targeted questions.
Mhm.
So the first strategy from the book I would use, I have the index over there, I can grab the book, but it's the unread library effect. And the unread library effect is this idea that you want to ask people in as much detail as possible to explain something. So I've mentioned this, I think I mentioned this in my New York Times piece, but the researchers in the book, I didn't do that to name drop. I just did that because I'm kind of helping myself think of where I've done it. I've done so much shit about this. These two researchers um, wanted to test people's confidence and how much they knew, and see if and see what the results is. So they asked them about the inner workings of toilets, and they found out that when they asked people, how confident you know how a toilet works, and they said, oh no, we're very, very confident. And then subsequent to that, they said, well, give me as much detail as possible, detail. And in the end, they like post tested them and asked them how confident they were. They weren't confident at all. They lowered their confidence. We did this to, I'm not going to mention his name in the podcast, so there's permission, to a friend of ours who happens to be a plumber extraordinaire, among other things. And he, at your house, actually, he gave me the most insane lesson about how toilets work. So
Yeah,
in
I
that
was
case, that actually turned out to be great because I got a free lesson in how toilet works. It cost me
And
nothing.
I
And
realized I really had no idea how toilets work compared to
yeah,
Christians.
it's interesting, isn't it? So if you want to talk to your family members about social distances, the number one technique I would use is the unread library effect. Ask them about trends, as many specifics as possible, and just unpack it. And then you'll be helping them to understand that they don't know what they think they know.
There you go. Here's another question from Coach Ray. Peter, if you could go back in time to talk with your younger self, would you, number one? And if so, what time in your past would you go and why? That's interesting. He's not asking what you would say. He's asking whether or not you'd even do it. And if so, at what age would you go back? And then why?
Boy, that's a really good question. I would absolutely do it. I would have to go to think back at what intervention points in my life I could say something to myself to help myself get better data. We talk better data. I talk about this in the book a little bit that people Socrates says in the Theaetetus that people don't knowingly do bad things or believe bad things. They act in the way they do because they don't have all of the information. That's sociopaths and psychopaths aside. Like the vast majority of people, they're just acting on what the information they have. So I would think it's a really good question. So I've suffered from Crohn's disease for many years. So I would go back probably to when I first started suffering from that when I was 13 and tell my then self what I have learned to make my path easier. There have been months and months where I've just been laid up like immobile. That's also when people knee ride me. It's really tricky because I got all that inflammation in my stomach.
Right.
So I'd probably go back to when I was 13 and so yes, I would, and when I was 13, and I would give myself specifics for how to move forward.
Excellent. Excellent. So here's one thing we could talk a little bit about. You've accomplished a lot of things that are difficult to do, generally speaking, like write books that sell well and pull off the academic hoax and stuff. But you've talked about in the past, and I don't say this in any way um, derogatory, but because I think it would be really helpful to a lot of people, because I think a lot of people experience frustration learning jujitsu. You've talked about to me in the past about how jujitsu has been somewhat frustrating for you. And so, is it? Do you still find it frustrating, or is it getting better?
I'm an unbelievably slow learner. I mean, I think I'm an epically slow learner. And Coach John Diggins said to me something. He said, I've been doing it. The guys who first started have a kind of PTSD with it. And I think he's absolutely correct. Where we used to try to kill each other.
Hmm.
So one of my big problems has been relaxing over time. The, that's why I wanted to do that class as well to help me relax. The other thing is I think I let ego get in the way a lot. You know, you got to win and you got to win. And then when you think like that, then you think, well, I've got to use attributes.
Hmm.
And then, like you said to me, I think once you said a long time ago that I've cheated the system. I've tried to cheat the system, and I think that's right. I think this is one of those things you just can't cheat the system.
Hmm.
You just have to. And cheating the system for me, fortunately, wasn't like, oh, I don't want to tap. I've never minded tapping at all. It just doesn't has never. I know that some people it's like a kind of a trauma to them to tap, and then those people quit and never get their blue belts.
Right.
So I think if for me is kind of thinking about shortcuts and such, not thinking about the fundamentals. I also think for me it was a lack of a kind of the life circumstances in which I found myself. Married, children, full time plus job,
Sure. Sure.
doing other stuff, and the fact that I found my work to be of social value and importance
Hmm.
meant that I couldn't get in as much as I want. Plus, my wife had a rule: we all have to eat dinner together at the table. So
Good.
that, yeah, so it is, but it puts a serious hamper on your jujitsu when you work, you know, when you're working a lot. Um,
That's okay. Here's another question from Abe. Did your previous training slow your learning? I'm sure he's talking about the Kali Eskrima stuff that you did.
to my previous training, some of it was a complete waste of time. Matter of fact, most of the kicking, like I used to be a really good kicker. I have short legs though. I think that was a total waste of time. You don't see people use that because remember I was training way before they institutionalize these things. I do think that it wasted a tremendous amount of. Did it hinder my training? Yeah, probably. I mean, I think I would have been better off if I had just done a few years of. Actually, when I first went to PSU, I talked to the wrestling coach to see if I could do wrestling practice with them. He said no,
Hmm.
um, which was a bummer. But what am I
You're
supposed to do?
probably afraid of,
Lawsuits.
yeah, liability. Here's another question from Kinson. Follow-up question to the unread library effect. What do you do if the other person, one, doesn't change their perspective even afterwards, doesn't feel any less confident, doesn't want to talk about it, or when explaining it, doesn't use any facts, primarily just opinions and feelings?
That's a
That's
that's a great question.
yeah,
That's
good
a
question.
great question. Here's the problem. The problem is that we live in an age that it's in philosophy. Sometimes it's called the subjective turn. We've taken a turn towards subjectivity where people think that their feelings are a guide, a reliable guide to objective reality. And the problem is that we have we. I'd love to know how old the people. Hey, how old are the people you're talking about? Because younger people are far more susceptible to that. Because people in my generation and one down didn't. Millennials certainly weren't taught that. Uh,
Yeah.
so so two things. One, it could be that it's just an intractable problem, and then you should switch the goal of the communication to just mutual understanding, to understand someone's position.
Mhm.
And the second thing is, and I don't know if this is going to be helpful to you, but I'll always think that in something that's so clearly true, in which objective facts align with the fact that we need to social distance, if nothing else than for a precautionary principle, to take precautions,
Yeah.
then I would think I didn't ask the right questions. But it's always, in other words, I would place the failure of that on me. I'm not saying you should do it, but on me, because I literally wrote the books and the app on it. So I would think that there's something that I could have said that I didn't say, that didn't trigger or elicit a response. Because remember, the goal is not necessarily the goal. Here's the goal. The goal is to instill doubt, to help people understand that the confidence they have in their belief is not warranted. And it's very easy to instill doubt. It's very difficult to put a particular belief in someone's head. It can be
Mhm.
done. I haven't written about it anywhere because of the ethical implications of it, but um, the goal is to instill doubt. So if they think they don't need to do social distancing, the other thing you can do is you, you might think that you're not being effective in that conversation, but you are. And the
Yeah.
only way to figure that out is that you need another technique in how to have impossible conversations, which is scales. And scales is at the beginning of the conversation, you ask them, how confident are you? Frame it however you want, but how confident are you that it's not important for you to maintain social distance from people, 6 feet or whatever it is, have the conversation, and then you ask them the scale at the end. So without scales, you wouldn't know if you're effective or not.
Sure. Here's another question from Coach Ray. What correlations do you see between jujitsu and your profession as a philosophy professor?
Oh, tons. It's informed my profession tremendously, just night and day. The main thing that it's given me an outlet to refine an idea that I used to be utterly obsessed with, but I think I've pretty much figured it out now, so I don't think about it anymore. Maybe we could linger on this if you wanted, but corrective mechanisms. I think
Mhm.
this is extremely important for any kind of philosophy as a general as a discipline is unhinged from reality and does not have corrective mechanisms. Corrective mechanisms is something that allows you to align your belief with reality. So science is a corrective mechanism. It's a tool to correct your cognitions and your feelings about reality. Jiu-Jitsu is a phenomenal corrective mechanism. I think I asked when you came in and did a guest lecture, Matt, one of my students, I think, and this perception is, oh, you don't want like the pinky technique to work. I don't know if you remember that. And I said, well, if a guy comes into your gym and he says to you, hey, I have this technique, it's revolutionized. You wouldn't say to him, go fuck yourself. You'd say, okay, here's a blue belt or a purple belt. Let's see how it works. And if the pinking technique actually worked, you'd incorporate it in, right? So it's not that you maintain skepticism and doubt, but you test it. So that idea of testing is key, and you have testing in jujitsu. just as you have testing in jujitsu, you need some mechanism to test your own thoughts. You need a corrective. You need some way to bring your thoughts in alignment with reality. And there are so many things fighting against you. Culture is fighting against you. Desirability bias is fighting against you. You know, you desire something to be true. And I
Mhm.
looked at something just the other day. I'm not going to talk about what we're not going to talk about, but anyway, you got to keep your cognitions in check. And then there's also confirmation biases as well. So jujitsu is phenomenal for that.
Yeah, and it's almost the correcting mechanism in jujitsu is so easy. So much I can't even off the top of my head, to be honest, I'm not sure I could think of another subject that would have an easier self-correcting mechanism than jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Easier one to use
Yeah, and
when
you
it's
can
so
see
simple.
it. You can see it instantly. I think I told you the idea, like, so if you, it's, you know, when someone, you know, there's actually a world championship. This is true. You can look it up. It's a world championship air guitar in Finland, and I think those guys are awesome air guitarists. They
Yeah,
really are. They're phenomenal. They have a tremendous show. But that doesn't mean they can actually play guitar.
right,
Right. So the guitar is the corrective mechanism and the strings, etc. It's like we've spoken of before. If you know, you can play, I can pretend to play basketball and spin it on my finger and put it on my head and do all that stuff. But there's no corrective mechanism there. So absence of corrective mechanism, and that's directly informed my classes and my teaching and my pedagogy, everything, because I try to help people. Like the last question, I think Coach Reyes, I try to help people to give themselves a corrective mechanism, because I'm only with them for 10 weeks. After
right,
that, they need some way to figure out what's true from what's false.
right. Then they can fish on their own. That's aliveness, right?
That's exactly what it is.
Right. So we had a D&D question from Abe. He says, since I heard it was okay to ask, which version of D&D is your favorite? He's partial to second edition, but hasn't played since second was still popular.
Well, we just started 5e. Maybe we so do we have a lot of questions? Because I'd like to talk about that for a sec.
No, go ahead.
So
I'll write it down.
we're doing 5e now. So
Mhm.
this was in Coet up till now. Someone asked me about this on Twitter, and I've been thinking of talking about this too. So here's the problem I have. It's like, so 5e introduces this all this wild, like totally wild stuff into it that the third edition, which I played just daily in high school, did not have. And then I played in college, although not as much as I would have liked. And then I took a hiatus. But this is difficult for me to articulate. I hope I do a good job of this, but it, it's like someone said to me about their girlfriend cheating on them. If they can, and then leaving someone else for you, if they can do it for you, they can do it to you.
Sure.
In D&D 5e, there's some similar principle there. It's like there's all this crazy shit that people are doing now, that you know, paladins have oaths they never had in previous editions. They have ors, have all this, you know, before in the third edition you can only be lawful good paladin, and
Right.
there's just all this, you know, the shapeshifters and stuff. If you can do it to them, they can do it to you.
Right.
And I don't see a fraction of that occurring. I also think it's impossible for me personally, and perhaps this is a lack of creativity, to get my mind around all of the insane permutations of all these new abilities and classes and races and spell. I mean, it's not just populated by, I mean, there's just so much stuff, but yet you never see any of that stuff manifested to you. You just
Mhm.
manifest that stuff on other people. So I think that it's in this, and I'm just going to go off a second. And it's like we had the Beatles and rock and roll, and then everything splintered out. You know, there's ska, and then, you know, all this stuff. I think, you know, the same thing with D&D. It became more complicated. Or, you know, I see these plays games sometimes. It's like more abilities, and you can choose this decision trees and all this stuff. And I see this in D&D, with they've kind of improved or advanced or trying to streamline the mechanic, and
Mhm.
they've given people more options. But
Mhm.
if you have more options, everybody else has more options to do the things to you.
Right.
I don't know if that
Yeah,
made any sense.
that makes sense. I played first edition when I was a kid in high school and stopped playing when I was 15. and never played a game again until a couple years ago when I restarted. And the reason why I started was to actually to play with my kids. And I thought, oh, that'd be a fun thing to do. Plus, I was kind of reminiscing about the artwork and the monster manual and all the cool things, when you're a young teenage boy in the first edition. So I bought all those books. And then I realized from talking to Zach that there was now a fifth edition, and I purchased those books. So I've only played first and fifth. I've read through the others and own the others, and I'm not a big fan of the editions in between, to be honest, especially second edition, because that's when after the satanic panic they removed a lot of the stuff that was the funnest in the game. But the thing about fifth edition is it's so streamlined. So it really emphasizes role playing and de-emphasizes the need to constant for the dungeon master and everybody else to constantly be looking up all these different charts. And I think that
Yeah, I
part,
like that.
yeah,
I
that,
like
that
that.
that part's very cool because I think the big social value that comes from D&D, and I do think it has a lot of social value when you play it with your kids or your friends. And it's something where somebody's not trapped on looking at the other side of a glass screen, because I think we already have way too much of that. And you're playing in person, and there's all this social interaction, which is, I think, the most powerful and beneficial thing in the game. And fifth edition emphasizes that part of it, the social interaction. So that's why I like it.
Yeah, I love it. I would suggest that people play with their families in this time of lockdown. So it's just a wonderful thing. It made me so happy the one time my son came and a couple times my daughter came. I think my son liked it so much that he was actually embarrassed by how much he liked it.
That happens to people, yeah. It used to be, and that's the other thing, is when I was a kid, I was a nerd when I was a kid, obviously. But it used to be something that just, kind of the nerds do. And it's not like that anymore. I mean, it's actually become like, a cool thing to do for whatever that means. But
Mm.
here's another question from Carolyn, uh, or Carlin. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. What advice would you give to women entering a male dominated sport like BJJ?
Matt, that's for you.
For me, I tell them to make sure you feel comfortable when you go to the gym. Look around and is there women on the mat? Do you like the way the instructor is teaching? Is everyone respectful and treating each other respectfully? And above all else, do you feel comfortable? Because I think the thing that myself and Coach Raymond and Coach Paul Sharp and the other people who emphasize sometimes some of the self defense aspects, we're always trying to get people, women and men, but can be particularly true sometimes with women, to trust your instincts and not be afraid to be assertive and walk away if the situation doesn't feel right. And we put such an emphasis on that in SBG, that I would think that if she came to one of our gyms, if she's a student at one of the gyms, she'd feel very comfortable. She's not going to wind up rolling with guys who are going to be upset and try and beat her up or tap her real hard. And so then she'd be in a good environment to train. But if there's no SBGs close to you and you don't have that, then make sure you go yourself, you observe a class, maybe try a class, and just make sure you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I'd say too, and again, this is from a male perspective, obviously. I always try to treat women the same. Like
Yep.
I don't, I try to give them respect as training partners and not like, oh, she's a woman, she can't handle it. I probably err on the side of being too trying to be very technical, you
Right.
know. Um,
Which
but
is
I
a good,
think,
that's what you want to err on.
yeah, yeah, and I do think, well, when I roll with Amanda, I'm like, oh shit. Um, but I do think if you go to a gym and people are like treating you, I don't know what you think about this, but if they're just not giving you competitive roles, I think that's not good.
No, and that's the flip side of the same culture. So no, for myself in SBG and for the other coaches and the other owners of the gym, I believe very strongly that the single most important thing I do, both as the president of the organization and as the head coach of one of the schools, and the single most important thing any of the other owners do as the head coach of that school, by far, is create and guide the culture of
Yes,
that.
absolutely.
And if the culture is correct, then people will be treating each other respectfully, and anyone, regardless of what size they are or how old they are, or whether they're male or female or whatever the situation is, should be able to walk in there and have a safe, competitive, fun learning experience.
Exactly.
That comes from the top down. So if there are issues at the top, either where the instructor himself has problems with that kind of thing, or he's not mindful of his culture and he just runs one of those gyms where anybody can do anything and he doesn't want to be assertive and control it in any way, then you'll see that manifest itself on the mat with inappropriate behavior,
Right.
whether it's rolling too rough or not rolling with a woman competitively at all. It won't work out well.
Yeah, I've never seen any of that, and I'm not saying this other than because it's true. I've never seen any of that at SBG ever, not even once. Uh,
I
all the
mean, when we
decades
find
I've been
someone
there,
like that that comes to the
they're
gym,
out.
they're out, right? We try and correct it,
Right.
or we have to get rid of them. And the hardest thing I do in of my job, whether it's as the head of the organization or the head of my own particular gym, is get rid of people. But it's also the most
Right.
important thing I do.
Right.
Here's another question from Kinson. It said, relating to the principles from your book about having impossible conversations, how does one, if even possible, help the other person get a decision on a time sensitive topic? Making sure, make it a decision by a certain date. There's already a lot of built in resistance trying to have any conversation on this topic, making any decisions, and immense sensitivity on the topic.
Yeah. So for that, I'd recommend what we talk about in the book. It's called disconfirmation questions. The in philosophy, the publisher didn't want me to put the word in. It comes from applied epistemology. The word, if you want to look it up, is defeasibility. Defeasibility. Published a little thing in the Skeptic about that a while ago. I published a ton of stuff. I think it's one of the most, if not the most important concept in all of an area of one particular area of philosophy. So I would front load that question with front load that conversation with defeasibility or disconfirmation questions. Here's a disconfirmation question: under what conditions could that belief be false? So you ask targeted questions like that, and so then they're generating to themselves kind of I think Coach Raids, it's a variation of that question. They're generating to themselves ideas under what conditions could, okay, so I'm answering my own question as opposed to someone delivering a message and send me. So if it's time sensitive, it's more important to get to the to get to the disconfirmation question. Also, if you ask a scale question, how confident are you in that decision? If they say, for example, 8, the what the it seems intuitive to say, okay, well, what would bring you to a 9? Don't do that. That's a mistake. This is counterintuitive. You have to ask yourself, oh, really? So they have this time sensitive decision. How confident are you that this is the route you have to take? Oh, I'm 7 or 8. Doesn't matter what. 7 confident. Then say, oh, that's interesting. Why aren't you a 5? So if you do that, they'll talk themselves into disconfirmation questions themselves as opposed to going up the other way. Took me literally decades of thinking about this stuff to figure that out. But that's the trick for time sensitive subjects.
Yeah, you're basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're trying to do is put people on the path of figuring out what their own self-correcting mechanism
Yes.
is as it relates to that particular belief, right?
Yep. And you're asking them if they think it's really the best option.
Yeah,
And what we have now is we have conversations in which people deliver messages. I have my message, you have it's a message delivery service. Message. Everybody's messaging, but nobody's asking targeted questions that help people become more reflective and recalibrate their confidence downward about their beliefs.
absolutely. Good to see you too, Zach. It's good to see everybody, and I can't wait to get back on the mat myself. So going back to that question real quick, Pete, you mentioned earlier when we were talking that oftentimes people will declare the highest level of confidence in things that they have the least amount of evidence for.
True.
And it doesn't necessarily, that it sounds almost immediately when I say that I'm talking about religion, but it's not necessarily, it way larger than religion. It's just a general kind of rule, right? And why do you think that is?
Oh boy, that's another question. I guess my go-to response would be there's some quirk of evolution, something about, Shermer talks about this in The Believing Brain, and Jerry Coyne talks a lot in a roundabout way about this, is that, that's why people believe in conspiracy theories. Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow talks about this a little bit. I think that there are evolutionary advantages to that.
Hmm.
I think when you I think the natural thing we all have it, and I know I have it in myself, to calibrate our confidence up. A lot of things. It's like a suite of issues. It's ego, it's culture, it's everybody knows it. You can think of it kind of like a recipe,
Hmm.
and we're all mixing these ingredients together. I don't know if this analogy is actually is the best one, but every single time you add a different component, like ego, you're then raising the bar even higher. Daniel Dennett has this idea that I think is super important. I've talked about it a lot. It's a wonderful idea. Belief and belief, and
Hmm.
that we believe that we should believe things. And so once we believe we should believe things, it's more difficult to revise that belief.
Right.
So that's a component. I mean, it's a chowder of different um I'm trying to think of an analogy. I can't seem to think of one. Um, I just think it's multifactorial, and there are just a lot of reasons for that. The question is, how do we get out of it, and how do we address it?
And ultimately, there's going to be probably underlying it if we dig down far enough. Don't you think there'd probably be, what you mentioned first, some biological reason behind it related to our evolutionary development?
Definitely, definitely, yeah.
Going back to Coach Ray's question, he was asking how jujitsu, how your work has informed jujitsu, and you talked quite a bit about how jujitsu informed your thinking as a philosophy professor. But as a philosophy professor and writer, has that informed your jujitsu at all?
No, I think the jujitsu has been the base, has informed me personally, which I didn't get to, professionally. Um, but the other thing is, I think when I go to the gym, I try to let everything go.
Right,
Oh, and you know what I've done? You actually told me this. I was getting gassed crazy, and then I started taking those things. What are those things called again?
Element P, Rob Wolf's product.
Yeah, I started. God, those were crazy helpful. I would
Yeah,
go
you need
for
that. You sweat that out. You need that.
yeah. I was yeah. So that helped a lot. I
I'll have to
wanted to
get Rob
say
on here and we can talk about that. I'll do a chat with him on here for the
yeah. We did a podcast with Rob. He's a great guy.
yeah.
He looks great too. How old is he, by the way?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I'm sure somebody will post on here and tell us. Ray knows him pretty well, but I think he's around my age, although he looks like he's about 30 years younger.
Jeez, he looks great.
It's what clean living gets you, I guess.
I know, and I gotta tell you, I've been stuck in this house and I'm eating these freaking pies. My daughter has all these pies from this fundraising event. I, God, sugar is just it. What a drug it is, man. I mean, it is like
Yeah.
it is the best thing ever. And my guess is that as good as it tastes, that is the exact degree to which it's terrible for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost always true. Here's a question from Torrance. Have either of you found any functionality of ego on the mat or in the world of jujitsu? It's a good question.
You want to go first, and then I'll go.
Sure, and my answer to that is absolutely. I mean, we often talk. I mean, jujitsu instructors, and I think people in general often talk about the negative aspects of the ego and how you have to overcome that so that you put yourself in vulnerable positions so that you can then adapt and become better, and you have to uh, allow yourself to put yourself in a position where you can tap over and over again. And the ego is often counterproductive to that goal, but it's also just a necessary part of being a human, and you can go too far the other way as well. I think it rarely happens, and I don't myself usually wind up talking about that as a jujitsu instructor because of its rarity. But you can have somebody, for example, who just doesn't care at all about winning or losing, or really, which almost falls into the category of apathy, almost apathetic about growing, and they're just on the mat to have a good time. Um, and that's okay, but that person's learning curve is also probably going to be somewhat limited because they're never going to push themselves. They're never going to have any kind of drive that really uh, al- forces them, or not forces is the wrong word. They're never going to have the kind of drive that leads to a natural state of discipline, like John Kavanaugh talks a lot about, where he's never had to take one of his fighters ever and say, "Hey, it's time to get up and work out," because they love it, right? They love doing it, and the discipline comes naturally. And I think for that kind of natural discipline, ego is an essential part of the product. So I think it's not about getting rid of the ego. I think it's just about not letting the ego be in control of you, and it's a better servant than it is a master. But that would be my answer. But what would you say, Pete?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought, I have no evidence for this, but it's a strong speculation that it takes a certain type of person to tap over and over and over again for years to advance,
Mhm.
and some people simply can't do it. They just can't do it,
Right.
and those people will never be good at jujitsu. And furthermore, my guess is that those people will be angry and bitter people, and I have the perfect picture of the people I'm thinking about in my head. I mean, these are the people who really glob onto social justice, right? I think that they're inherently weak. I think that they could not possibly, almost all of them, not all of them. I'm sure there are exceptions to this. But those exceptions, my guess would be it's because of what biologists call the sneaky fucker. So it's a kind of a mating ideal, but there is something about submitting over and over again that I don't know if it necessarily does something to your ego, m- m- maybe tangentially, but it certainly does something for you as a person. It helps you. It's a profoundly humbling and growth related experience, and I do think that that relates to ego, but not directly.
For sure. Here's a question from Zach. Coach Matt, do you ever feel that it's ever appropriate to use speed strength in minor measured intervals to finish a move or in appropriate places sparingly? Yeah, for sure. So um, I try never to, as a coach, and to speak too dogmatically and use words like always. And usually, if I find myself using a word like always or never when I'm teaching jujitsu, I try, which I do sometimes. I'll try and rewind and go back because I'm probably making a mistake because it's such. There's always an exception every rule. Every situation requires its own answer. And but speaking of generalities, the basic rule is I want all my students and members of SBG to be as strong and as fast and as healthy and as explosive and as humanly possible. And I want them to use as little of that in the gym when they're training jujitsu as possible for all the obvious reasons that everybody knows. Um, but there's also times where you want to get a feel for what your body is capable of when you're rolling competitively and you're using those attributes. Like, can I actually catch this particular arm lock if I do turn up the speed a little bit, or if I use a little bit of my strength, could I finish this submission or could I escape the submission? And those are questions that you can only answer by doing it. And sometimes, especially if you're somebody that wants to compete in tournaments, you want to
Right.
know the answer to that question.
So,
So
yeah, go ahead.
sparingly would be the right word, Zach.
So I'll add to that too. I think it was you who told me that uh, Gunny saw tremendous developments when he slowed down his game, and like the slow roll thing, and made it more technical.
Yeah, he
Was it?
told me that one time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the question is, so we have a class. Actually, my class the was the super slow, the hyper technical rolls, and no tap as much as you want, but not from exhaustion.
Right.
Um, so in that class, that would never be acceptable.
Right.
But there are other classes, like in kind of comp teams, where people specifically go because it's been agreed upon. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's been agreed upon ahead of time that what the rules of the game are.
Right.
And so I think too, it's key to figure out what the class is.
Right. Yeah, and like I was talking about earlier with the question related to ego, it's far more often we find ourselves as Brazilian jiu-jitsu coaches having to tell people to slow down, having to tell people to use less
Right.
strength. And so we usually wind up, speaking about that far end of the spectrum. And very rarely do we have somebody that needs to, hang on a little tighter or turn it up a little more. So we don't usually talk about that part of it for good reason. Here's another question from Thomas. Do you think BJJ inherently brings out emotional maturity, personal growth, intellectual honesty, reality check, or does it self-select for such traits as you mentioned, uh, i.e., it is neutral, or are positives I see the result of SBG gym culture? That's a good question. Why don't you field that one, Pete?
That's a great question. It's complicated. It's a great question precisely because it is so complicated. So we've already established, I think virtually everybody would agree with me on this. There's just a certain type of person who simply could not do jujitsu because they're not willing to tap. So that self selects people out of the pool right from the get go.
Right.
So once those people have been self selected out of the pool, the question is, what is the effect on the people who remain who are willing to go through that process?
Hmm.
Those people, I wouldn't say always, but almost invariably experience some type of maturity
Hmm.
in a way that you don't experience with traditional martial arts, which is a lot of it's bullshit. It's the bowing. It's because it's a lot, the katas, a lot of it's the stuff is just inherently fake.
Right.
And so when it's fake, you don't develop actual humility. You do develop a certain kind of weird discipline, kind of arbitrary discipline. But I think the question is so good because it's extraordinarily good for people who already go into it who possess certain attitudinal and emotional dispositions, and it will help those people. But if the people who don't possess those, well, they don't go into it, so then by definition it can't help them. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah. Um, I think jujitsu can be a fantastic vehicle for maturity and self-actualization, for lack of a better term, but that doesn't guarantee it. And I've seen jujitsu have incredibly positive effects on all kinds of students over the years, which is one of the reasons why I love it. But I've also met people who were really, really good at jujitsu who are just awful human beings. So that happens too.
Yeah, and in my personal experience, and obviously your experience is far greater than my own. The more skilled people I have ever met, the most skilled people I have ever met are the nicest people.
Mhm.
They have nothing to prove. They know exactly what they can and cannot do. Just on the Cameron Earl thing, I rolled with him a few times, if you could even call it rolling. I mean, he was phenomenal.
Mhm.
And I remember being he was always very nice to me, but perhaps that was because he didn't recognize me as any kind of a threat whatsoever.
Right.
But I often wonder, God, could you imagine being that guy's cellmate? Like I was thinking about that after he got arrested. Like he is just so unbelievably dangerous. To be in the same cell with that guy, it would be terrifying to me.
Yeah, but thing about prison is it'll be like 20 to 1. So who knows? Hopefully they never let him out. So what else would you like to talk about, Pete? What until we get some more questions that pop up?
Well, let's see. I'm very excited about our campaign, which we're going to do tonight.
That's going to be fun.
Um, I'm watching Narcos right now, which is not normally a show that I watch, but I'm watching it for other reasons. I'm writing a screenplay, and so I think I've been told that the
Marcos,
Narcos,
the drug dealer.
yeah, it's very good. It's been interesting to me. Like I've always been for the legalization of marijuana, even though I don't smoke marijuana or smoke it anymore. I haven't smoked since high school, a few times in between, but it's a terrible drug for me. Makes me want to eat mac and cheese and then get paranoid. Um, but it's been so striking to me how utterly insane the war on marijuana was. It's a complete, total, unmitigated catastrophe. And I'm thinking about like one of those little tugboats that brings the big boat in. It's like society changes so slowly to things. Um, but it's interesting. If anybody's watched Narcos in the comments, I'd be interested to see their thoughts. I've been trying to watch as much. Been taking this time to opportunity. I've been extremely busy in this pre-apocalyptic world we live in. I'm teaching my kids to drive, playing softball every time. Definitely eating too much. But I've exhausted the genre of science fiction. I recommended The Platform to you, which I just watched last night, like 3 in the morning, which I thought was pretty interesting. Um,
Yeah, I mentioned to people when I put up that we were going to have a conversation that I'm not sure I've ever met anybody who is as big of a fan or knows as much about science fiction, in particular the movies, as you. And having said that, and you can probably reel this off right off the top of your head, if I said list the top three science fiction television shows, what are you going to come up with?
the top three that I like.
Top three, yeah.
Yeah, I've been obsessed with science fiction since I've been a child. I don't know why. I've literally watched every single night since I've been a kid. I've done everything I can to, even in the whole VCR tapes, watch episodes of you name it. I've exhausted the genre. There's nothing left for me. I've even seen two or three things, but I guess it would depend on what you like. If you're looking for deep profundity, then there's no question about it. Babylon 5 is the show. Has to be watched in order from first episode down. Straczynski, guy who wrote that's fucking genius. Unbelievable. Just wonderful. If you're looking for some really good characterization, this I really enjoyed. My next tie would be between um I love Farscape, big fan. I think the show ended prematurely after 5 seasons, but they did a phenomenal job with that. The characterization in that was incredible. The world, they literally created this incredible world. Great pilot too. Um, Blake Seven, the old show. If you like old stuff, that the characterization in that was
I'm sure I've even
phenomenal.
heard of that. Lake Seven.
Oh, dude, you can get it on YouTube. Oh man, that's just mandatory. It's an older show, but I don't want to say too much about it, but if it's mandatory viewing if you like sci-fi, like mandatory.
I'll check it out.
Um, let's see. The newer Battlestar Galactic is fantastic.
Yeah, that was great.
That was really a way to reflect on cultural issues at the time. Sorry, I'm sitting here, my phone's going crazy. Um, let's see. Oh, that's four. I've actually cheated it, but so I would say those. So and those are very easy to get lost in because now you can just binge watch them, which is great.
Right. We had a couple questions here. Zach asked Pete, Kirk, or Picard. That's not even. We don't even need to answer that. It's obviously Captain Kirk. So we'll move on to the next one. Um, Coach Ray's asked. Let me see. What has what has jujitsu changed or enhanced in you personally? What are the top three things it has taught you in life? Wow. Um, I'm not sure I can answer that question certainly on here with any kind of specificity because jujitsu is so interwoven, such a part of my life. It's been my only job for the last 22 years. Um, it's given me the opportunity to travel all over the world, to meet all kinds of people, to become friends with all kinds of people, like Ray, like you, Pete, and everybody else. Um, and so it has been really other than my relationships with my wife and my kids and my close friends, it's really been the only vehicle I have for any kind of self development. So the honest answer to that question would be pretty much everything. In terms of what it's given me. Here, Zach has a question. What is the most impactful thing you've learned from Hickson and Howder and Coach Pete? The most impactful thing you've learned from me or others in life, jujitsu, whichever. You want to go first, Pete?
The most impactful in terms of jujitsu or in terms of outside of jujitsu?
It just says thing, but from a jujitsu instructor like myself or somebody else.
I don't know if there's a single thing. If I were forced to answer that question, I'd say it's always interesting when I watch you roll or John roll. It's like watching John roll. It looks like he's ready to fall asleep on the beach. I told you that time when Frankel came and he went and he drank and he was exhausted. Did I tell you this?
No.
And we rolled and he fell asleep in the middle of the roll twice. He literally fell asleep while I was trying to kill him.
Ah,
Um,
I know your jiu-jitsu's good.
yeah, and he ended up tapping me and then falling asleep again. Um, so I think it's a kind of relaxation is one thing. And then the second thing is the I don't know if this is most impactful, but it's a way for me to think about it. So it's like when in Somalia or something they kill one of our guys, it's a big victory. They're dragging him through the streets and it's good. But for us, that's a loss. Like we killed 800 of their guys or whatever, and we lost one guys, and we look at that as a loss.
Right.
I think when you roll with someone better than you have to change the win and loss conditions. So when I roll with you, I've changed the conditions ahead of time in my mind. So I know that I'm not going to tap you. But what I don't know is how many scissor sweeps will you have to try on me before it works.
Mm,
So I can fairly confidently say at this point I've rolled with you so much, it's rare that you get me on the first one. Would you say that's fair?
that's fair. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you probably get me on the second one, but if I can do three, I won. That's my win condition. If you have to try three times, and then the other thing is, how long can I go before I get tapped?
Yeah, that's a good metric.
So it. So to keep my heart rate down, my blood pressure, just to keep calm, to breathe, to keep my game intact, to keep my jujitsu, but yet to not be tapped. I think if I can extend that even a few seconds, that's my win condition. So that's a huge lesson I've learned.
Excellent, excellent. As far as biggest lessons, my biggest lesson from Hickson was what became aliveness after thinking about it, but it was how he trained and the importance he placed on timing. I've told the story before, but there was a video out where he showed up one time at Torrance Academy and was just rolling Ironman, basically the whole room of people. There was some good guys there too, like some old school guys, and he was just wearing swim trunks and no shirt or anything, and just tapped everybody out and just like rode his bike there and did that. And then afterwards, he's sitting up against a wall, and a guy's asking him how he got so good, and he explains in a couple sentences that jujitsu is all about timing, and so a knowledge of technique, yes, but it's timing. And then he talked about taking a triangle and isolating just that triangle, and you go back to it, and then the person escapes, and you go back to it, and then they escape, and you go back to it, and they get it, and then you get it again, and then you make it a little harder by opening up that space, and you worked his way backwards, and that was it. That explanation is what went on to become was the seed that planted went on to become a whole bunch of SBG methodology as far as drilling. From Chris, I learned a lot of things, but Chris always took Powder always took and takes a conceptual approach to jujitsu, so he encouraged that in me. Um, and I've learned so many lessons from him rolling over the years. When I was a blue and purple and brown belt, he would come up to live here in Oregon and would just stay at my house for weeks at a time, multiple times throughout the year. And we would just get up in the morning and go grab some coffee and just basically roll all day. And Chris would roll with anybody. So at that time, a lot of the Brazilian instructors that would come to my gym and they would see somebody like Dan Henderson or Randy Couture when we were training in Salem right after I had first kind of hooked up with those guys, and they were coming in and training all the time. They wouldn't have anything to do with those guys. One, because I think their ego maybe, and two was they were afraid they'd get in trouble because the politics of jujitsu at the time, and Howder just didn't care. Chris would roll with them, would roll with any. I remember the first time he rolled with Randy Couture, and he was underneath Randy, basically getting smashed for who knows how long, probably a half hour before he caught Randy in an arm lock. And then he'd get up the next morning and he'd want to go do it again. and and so that ethos, I think, also informed my values as it relates to jujitsu. Okay, so Kinson has a question. Pete, what books would you recommend for others to read for personal development? It's a good question.
Everybody, I do Twitter live AMAs, and everybody constantly asks me that, and I feel like when I say this, people are going to think it's a dodge. It's not a dodge. It really depends. Like, I need to know a little more, like in what genre, in what area, like about fiction, nonfiction, what kind of, like, I would really need
I
more to
did say
answer.
personal development. So how about in that specifically?
Of course, beside How to Have Impossible Conversations, my book. Well, beside that book, I have learned the most probably, given that now you have a lot of time, we're all stuck in here. I've really learned the most from Plato's Republic, followed
You've always
by,
referenced Plato ever since I've known you quite a bit.
yeah, I still revisit that, and the Meno and the Theaetetus are my favorite dialogues. There's a symposium, etc. But I just think it's all there. I think it was Whitehead said that all of philosophy is a footnote to Plato and Aristotle, one of those. But I think Plato and Aristotle. But I think that it's just everything. He's just this. It's really he's thought about just about all of it up until Wittgenstein, really. So I would have to say Plato, you can't go wrong with the Republic. Just taking your time with it and just thinking like, wow, this is. I mean, it really is deep, profound. I think it's profoundly wrong in a lot of ways, but it's incredibly profound.
Yeah.
Um,
We've got Jason Lansuki in Canada, Tim Irving, John Murphy from the East Coast, and Coach Kane of all logged on. Good to see you guys.
hey,
Make sure you
hola.
ask your questions. Type your questions in here because I'm reading them and we can get Pete to answer them before we log off here. Jason Lansuki asked opinions on Pierce Anthony's Adept series.
I read that a long time ago. What year was that published?
I don't know.
Does
See if
he does he say, hey, what year was that published? I read that a long time ago, and I really liked it, but I haven't read fiction in a while. Oh, back to the other question. No, my favorite people ask what my favorite fiction book is, and I'll say, can I make the question my favorite science fiction book? And they'll say yes. That's The Forever War by Joe Hadelman. It's an amazing book. Can't recommend it highly enough.
I have not read that.
Absolutely amazing.
Excellent. Thank you, Kenson. It's good to see you. Um, yeah,
So I like Pierce Anthony series. That was quite a while ago, and it informed my if memory serves me correctly, informed some of my characters and role playing as well.
what do you think it is about? Well, we'll come back to that question. Let's see what else we got here. Jason said 81, so it must have been 1981 that series was initially.
Yeah. So I remember I read that when it first came out, and I was really impressed. My guess would be, and again, I'm far from it now, but it will probably be a timeless classic, is my guess.
Excellent answer. So, hey, Steve Whittier just joined on.
Oh,
Good to
hey, Steve. Good to hear from you, man.
see you guys. What do you think has been one of the more valuable lessons that you've learned, let's say, in the last year or so from jujitsu in particular?
Uh, I think it's a combination of things. I think it's perseverance is key. Um, I don't know why. So something is dominating my head that I'll just say. Dan Dennett in this little piece he wrote about has the word chmess in it. Like chess with an M that's a mess. CHMESS. If you Google that, it's a free. It's like a 3-page article. He quotes someone that says, "If it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well. If it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well." I think I think that's a lesson jujitsu has taught me. And I think it's more acute every year I do it, to figure out what's not worth doing and then don't do it, as opposed to don't doing it well.
Mhm.
So, like certain positions that you can get in on the bottom, if they're not worth doing because you're stuck on the bottom, then they're not worth doing well.
Right. That's interesting. That's a good point. Uh, Jason says, "How about Varley's Titan Wizard Demon?"
Can't comment on it. Don't
Okay.
know.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one either. So
I
what?
do
Go ahead.
I do just on that. So I do think like my current character is a level 5 paladin, and I have the feat of a great weapon, a human. He started off lawful neutral, he became disillusioned. It's a very interesting backstory.
Let's have an interesting backstory.
Yeah, he was at the Flaming Fist. They deputized him, but then he became disillusioned with them, and he became chaotic neutral as a result of having being emotionally unstable and psychologically unstable. Anyway, I do think that I find myself limited in that character. Like he swings with a great, his great maul, or whereas my gnome illusionist, man, I was cranking out cool illusions and stuff. There's just more versatility and more stuff you could do with the class. And uh I don't know. It's like I see without mentioning their names, the people we play with, and they really play rogues very, very well.
Mhm.
It's like, but I do think I'm not sure this. I like my character, but I'm not sure this class is a good fit for me. There's just not enough. Or if there is enough, I don't know how to play it as such to make it more creative. The style of play, it's like, well, what do you do? You say to me, what do I do? Well, you heal, you hit him with your maul. I mean, there's not much. There's just not a lot of stuff that you can do.
Right. Yeah, I think you might have to think about that a little more. I think one of the most interesting parts of the game is characters' flaws, which is why I think it's such a mistake when people roll low and they'll try and roll again to get good numbers. You want those
Right,
low numbers, whatever
right,
that helps you play it. And then when people break the stereotypes, so rather than play a barbarian as stupid or a paladin as always has to be lawful following this particular code,
right.
I think that makes the game a lot more interesting. And having to think about how you can apply, even if you have limited skills, the things that in a more creative way that's an extra problem you have to solve that might be kind of fun for you.
Yeah, I need to think about that as I go forward. I'm not sure. I think it would help if I watched other games. Anyway.
John Dickens just said, "F that gnome." He had some
Aha.
problems.
I actually ate, and John Diggins played with us in the game, and his character, and with Henry Atkins actually, Akins,
Akins.
Henry Akins. Yeah, it was a Minotaur. They got killed in a game, and they served their characters up as stew, and I ended up eating both John Diggins and Henry.
Yes, you did. Kane Prevost has to log off. Good to see you, Kane. Um, I don't know if I told you or not, but Henry has joined the SBG team, so he's
Yeah,
in.
I started that on Twitter. Was delighted to hear that. I've always liked him. He liked playing D&D with us too.
He did. He loved it. Yeah, he's a good guy.
So every time he comes to do a seminar, we can give him free campaign. Oh, you see Teddy in the background there?
What's up, Teddy?
Teddy has been having a really difficult time, to be honest with you. Um, he's really, really traumatized by the puppy we have. He can't take it. He's almost in hiding 24 hours a day now.
It looked like they're sitting together pretty well right there.
No, that's not the puppy. That's a thing. That's a no. The puppy couldn't last 2 seconds down here.
Okay.
Teddy's traumatized.
Uh, all right. Well, you know what, Pete? We've been talking now for almost an hour and 20 minutes. So I'm going to give everybody maybe
Cool.
10 more minutes to see if they have any last questions to fill in, and then we can log off because you and I have to get ready. We're doing our online game here later.
Yeah, and I got to take my kid driving, and I got to do a bunch of other. Oh, and by the way, if anybody listening to this knows someone who's graduated from West Point or the Air Force Academy or with any of the other specialty colleges, if you could please reach out to myself or Matt and let me know. And I don't want to mention why here, but I would appreciate that.
Cool. So, until we'll give everybody a chance to ask their last questions, and then okay, here we got one. I love playing clerics. What are your opinions on them? I always thought they were a good balance of fighting and divine magic. They are, yeah. What do you think, Pete?
I think a lot of people don't like to play them because they're so boring. I personally couldn't play a healer. You know, it's like when you play online, World of Warcraft, whatever, people always thank their healer, but they don't thank a good tank, or they don't thank a good, off tank, or whatever it is, a good nuker. I personally don't like to play. I don't think that that comports with my playing style. I find I find clerics boring. Although I noticed in 5e they tried to jazz him up and make him a little more exciting, but it's just not for me.
Yeah, I think that really just you can make any character super interesting if you play them the right way, and clerics can be super interesting characters. You know, they have a good blend of pretty much everything. So don't be too down on clerics. Franklin Gilbert says, "When is your Iron Man so I can smash you?"
That's a good question. Ask me when the pandemic is over.
Yeah, and speaking of that, before we log off, so obviously everybody is home now, and depending on where they're at around the world or in the country, some of the people are under, do not even so much as do not go outside. So good percentage of people are here stuck in their house that might otherwise be the kind of people who always like to go out, always be active, go to the gym and roll. Do you have any suggestions for people on how to maintain their sanity while they're home?
Yeah, let me show you what I got here. You see that right down there?
What is
Those
that?
bottles of, bleach and such.
Right?
That's my home gym. Uh, I tweeted out my pull workout that I do. I'm not saying I'm a, super strong, good weightlifter or anything, but I've always enjoyed weightlifting. I used to read the magazines back in the day. And so I think it's really key to have a schedule, to be active. I try to walk sometimes. I've really been remarkably busy since this whole thing started. But you can look online. You can do push workouts are really easy. So I still work out an hour a day. In fact, right after this, I'm going to prep dinner and then teach my kid to drive, get a whole bunch of stuff. But I'm going to work out too. So I think structuring your day is good. Working out, even okay, is it a barbell? No. Is it a dumbbell? No. But you can do things with bottles. That you have. You can actually do drop sets with these too. That's why we have so many. Some of those are just filled with water. So we do drop sets with those to maintain. The thing you do is this really is a great opportunity, financial considerations bracketed. You can do anything. You can catch up on TV. You can read a lot. This is a great time. We got a puppy. If you have kids, that's a fantastic homeschool project, but frame it to them. It's like, look, we can do this if you're willing to do, I've been reading Cesar Millan's book about dog training. You can watch videos. There's just tons of stuff you can do. So I think that the key to this is to look at it as an opportunity. I'm teaching my kid to drive. I'm playing softball with my daughter, throwing the ball back and forth. Are you doing jujitsu? Am I doing jujitsu? No. Would I love to do that? Absolutely. But what is the expression? You got the deck you have. You go to, what did Rumsfeld say? You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want, something like that.
Right. Right.
So you got what you got. So this is an opportunity to make the best of it. You got your brain, you got your body, and this is a great opportunity to work on both of those.
Yeah, I completely agree. One thing Salome and I have always told our kids is they can complain and be a lot about a lot of things, and but what they're not allowed to complain about ever to her or to me is being bored. There,
Absolutely.
there is no excuse to be bored.
Boredom is an internal state.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, Rick, miss you too, brother. And Franklin, good to see you. Abe, have a good day. Obviously, this kind of goes without saying. I miss seeing everybody at the gym, doing our Friday night training, and all the stuff
Yeah.
that we do. And this too will pass, hopefully sooner rather than later, and we'll be able to all gather again and get in the gym. We're going to do a super seminar in Portland that's free for all our members, so they can come. And myself and Kane and Chris and Rick will be teaching. And John, hopefully, we'll all get together and be teaching segments, and we can celebrate the fact that this is over and we're able to get back on the mat. But
Boy, that can't come soon enough, man.
soon enough. In the meantime, I'll keep doing these um, conversations. Let me know if you guys want to talk to somebody else. I can always get back on here with Pete sometimes. I always enjoy having conversations with Pete. And having said all that, thank you, Pete, for doing this for me and for our members. And
My pleasure. My
I'm
pleasure. I'm a member too, so it's doing this for my own tribe. So I appreciate
absolutely,
that. Look,
we've
and
got
I'll
a
see.
little old school shirt on.
Yeah, and I'll see you tonight online in a few hours.
Yes, sir.
All
I'll
right.
see you in a
Thanks,
couple hours.
everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks,
Yep.
everybody. I'll see you guys soon.